Hello, and welcome to the Vegan Gym Live. We're the podcast where plant power meets cutting edge science. I'm Dr. Daphne Bascom, and I am your host for today. And I am delighted to have you here with us. If you are tuning in for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And if you've been here before, we love that you're back with us and would love to hear in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you are excited to learn about today for our tips on maximizing hypertrophy with Coach Daniel. The best thing is that each episode we bring you new insights on fitness, nutrition, health, and wellness. And today we're going to dive into some exciting topics. But first, let me introduce one of our amazing coaches, Coach Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the Vegan Gym Live.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daphne. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time and I appreciate the opportunity.
Daniel, I don't think you have been on the live stream before. So, would you be willing to share with the community a little bit about your background, where you're living right now, what prompted you to become vegan, and most importantly, a little bit about your why in terms of being here with the Vegan Superhero Academy?
So, starting at the beginning, I live in the usually sunny but currently gloomy Cape Town, South Africa. We're in the winter, so everyone in the northern hemisphere is in the summer currently. We're in winter. My fitness journey started in high school when I played a sport that is very similar to American football. It's called rugby. It's very similar to football, except we don't wear padding. And I played that up until matric, which is grade 12, the last year of school. Went to play professionally for my quote-unquote state or province, and then for my country for 2 years. And my mother very strictly said, you will study a science. And so I did. And I went into the field of chemistry, and I found myself kind of lost because rugby wasn't available to me anymore. And I found the world of health and fitness in the form of strength sports, bodybuilding and things like that, and started really taking interest in that, started getting qualifications as soon as I could, started coaching people, and fast forward a decade where I am today. I'm a vegan. I initially went vegetarian, I think about 7 years ago, because my cholesterol was kind of high. As a strength-based athlete, a physique-based athlete, you have to consume a lot of food, which can have a negative effect on cholesterol if you're not very smart. And I wasn't. I was a student, didn't have a lot of money. And so I knew from the science that just consuming more fiber, being a bit more healthy and conscious about your food decisions, especially the proteins, would definitely help my cholesterol. So I went vegetarian, and it did. And this is where my journey to veganism kind of differs to most people. I grew up on an animal farm. So from age 6, I was culling animals. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was culling animals, and a lot of them, because you live on an animal farm. And it always felt uncomfortable, but I was too young to voice it. I didn't have the vocabulary to voice like something's wrong, but it just felt wrong. And then I went vegetarian, and it felt really good. I saw brilliant results, no change in strength. Strength kept on creeping up. And I flirted with the idea of veganism because I knew it would yield better results in terms of health. And then someday, a friend of mine said, it's a good thing you still have whey protein and eggs because you couldn't do this as a vegan. I was like, well, I study science. I know you can. I'm just not. And he's like, nope, you can't do it. And I was like, I bet you I could. I bet you I could. And I made the choice there and then. And the feeling as a child of this is uncomfortable, and that feeling of wanting to prove a point met beautifully in the middle, and I felt amazing. Digestion was phenomenal. Performance was out of this world. Cholesterol kept, the good cholesterol kept climbing. Bad cholesterol kept coming down. Blood pressure was in control. Everything was just melding so beautifully, and I didn't feel that guilt that I had as a child. And that's kind of the reason why I ended up going vegan. And my reason for the Vegan Academy is because I really agree with the ethics of the company and the standpoint and the viewpoint of the company. And a big thing to me, I don't like forcing veganism on people. I'd rather show them. And I
Mm-hmm.
really believe that's what we're doing at the VSA. We're not trying to force veganism on someone. We're trying to show people like, hey, it is possible. It's normal to have questions. It's normal to have inquiries. Let us show you the way. Let us teach you. Let us take the time to help one another and show you that, hey, there's a different way of doing things that could actually benefit you, the environment, your overall health. And so that really aligned with my ethical view of veganism.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just that idea of not being in any way, shape, or form contributing to animal dismay.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, that is a powerful story. Thank you for sharing. It's amazing how many people adopt veganism who came from a similar background. So I'm sure that there were a lot of tough conversations in your family and your friends.
Yes, there
Understatement.
were. Um, there was a lot of the typical, I would say, male esoteric thing of like oh, tofu, soy boy, things like that. But you read the studies and you're like, well, it's not really true. Plus, if that were the case that soy raises estrogen, we would see the effects in the people who are affected by estrogen the most, which is probably females that already have a bit of estrogen. So they would skyrocket, but they don't.
We do
So
not.
we can see it exactly. We can see it in practice and in the studies. There's still a few people that have questions here and there, but it's just this is me. I'm not going to change for anyone. If you want to talk shop, I'll talk shop, but I'm not going to press it down your throat.
Yep.
But at the same time, if someone has questions, I'm always willing to help and talk about it.
So, talking about questions and helping people, we are here to talk about maximizing hypertrophy, which you have been. I mean, you're a leader on our team when it comes to education, coaching, performance, especially as it relates to those who are interested in competition, bodybuilding, maximizing their physique. In preparing for our conversation today, there's a whole host of things we could talk about, but I would love it if you would be able to share a few of your tips on one, logbooking, and then two, what is logbooking? And then why is it so important for anyone interested in maximizing hypertrophy?
So, very good question. Logbooking is really the idea of logging your lift. So, writing down this week I did 10 push-ups, next week I did 11 push-ups, or if you're doing weights, I did 100 pounds for 10 reps, then 100 pounds for 12 reps, 105 pounds for 10 reps. And so it's really, really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it keeps you accountable. It's kind of like a coach in your pocket, because you might rock to the day and there's a difference between I don't feel like doing something versus I had 2 hours of sleep because I was busy at work.
Mhm.
And I think there's a big difference between those two, and understanding the difference is important. And that's where the book comes in, or your phone if you're using an app. I know we use an app because it keeps you accountable. And that's a really, really beneficial thing. But then, of course, when we look at the principle of muscle growth, it relies on essentially just being better with time. Definitely, I know you're a long distance runner and you have to push. You have to push sometimes beyond what you did last week. It doesn't have to be a ton more. It doesn't have to be half a minute faster. It can be 5 seconds faster every second week. If you do 5 seconds faster every second week, that's 26 weeks times 5. That's 100 seconds across a run that you've cut off. That's a massive, and that accumulative improvement is really, really important. And the logbook allows it to be increased or measured very, very easily. And so it's something that I advise for most people. Some people, it's not perfect. Some people get really tied up in the numbers and then sacrifice form. So I would say logbook and asterisk as long as your form remains good.
So, thank you for explaining that. So, tracking is important. But in maybe if you could expound a little bit on where I hear you saying is progressive overload, or, you know, cutting off that 5 seconds a week, which is the same thing as progressive overload except for running. Could you tie together the concepts of how do I continue to make progress with progressive overload, but not become so fixated on the numbers that I'm not executing to form? Because if I'm doing the bicep curl and I'm just doing the beep, 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 that's not going to get you muscle growth. So there's a balance between improving and progressing, but also optimizing your form and using the muscle through its full range of motion.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I want to start at the end, what you mentioned. Form videos, phenomenal. Extremely, extremely important, because again, that keeps you accountable. If you have a coach, share it with your coach. I know here at the VSA, I get like 20 videos a day, and you have to sit and react to them. And it's actually kind of fun because you start learning to get to know your client's body. But even yourself, learning to know, like, let's say lateral raises. It's a movement that most people struggle with because their form usually starts to wander around. And just say, add one rep, keep your form good. And then once you get to a point where your reps I would say, gets around 15, it's different for every person, up the weight slightly. So the first thing that I'm going to say is form videos, extremely, extremely important. And then measurement of improvement. It's a delicate balance between adding that progressive overload without sacrificing form. And when your form starts getting poor, which movements usually you are a victim of. And you start to learn that with time, etc. And it's just about a good cue is mind to muscle connection.
Yep.
So think you're not moving a load unless you're a strength athlete, which is a different conversation. You're not moving from A to B. You're using the muscle to move a load. And there's a key difference. When we look at a strength athlete, they're trying to do something as easily as possible. Hypertrophy is the opposite. You're trying to make it as hard as possible, so form needs to stay perfect. And that way the muscle undergoes the most amounts of tension, and you need to provide the most amount of effort, which is going to yield the most amount of results.
Awesome. And so form videos are key. And
Yes.
I would completely encourage anyone who, if you have a coach, as Daniel said, to share it with your coach. But if you don't, take videos of yourself and at least analyze your own form, because you can learn a lot from watching yourself.
And a very good point, your form can improve over time, which is a form of progressive overload. If you squat and you kind of look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame first week, and by the 10th week you look brilliant, that's a massive progressive overload improvement, because whichever way you cut it, you're going to squat until the day you die because you're going to use a toilet. So really, really good to make sure that your form also, if it can, improves over time.
And Daniel, a question I frequently get is, what is the optimal number of sets and reps that I need to do to maximize my hypertrophy? Do you have any perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, it differs from person to person. It depends on gender, training age, sleep, recovery, food, stress levels. It depends on so many different things. I'm going to start at the second one, reps. When we look at the literature, you can grow muscle across all the rep schemes, from 3 reps up until 30. Now, there are a few caveats. Below 5, somewhat dangerous. If you're not experienced, be wary. Above 20, you have to be very fit. You have to be cardiovascularly fit, and you have to make sure the limiting factor is the muscle and not the lungs. I am obviously not as fit as you. If we both did a set of 50 of something, you would beat me cardiovascularly. My muscles might fatigue before yours. Technically, you would have to do 50 reps. I would have to do 25, but we would experience similar amounts of muscle gain. But I spend less time in the gym, but less fatigue. Okay. Sets, It depends from person to person, and it depends on your goals, and big factor depends on your recovery. But for most people, as little as possible, but as much as needed. And I'd much rather have someone do less sets with more effort than necessarily more sets with less effort. We in the westernized world are really obsessed with
Yep.
more. Exactly. And unfortunately, that's not always the best. There is a time and place for it. When you're on holiday and you have no weights, you might need to do a 20 set session. But if you train hard enough, you can get by with 14 sets a session, as long as it is adequately split across the body parts you are training. And just know that just because your legs require 6 sets per week to grow muscle doesn't mean your chest requires 6. It might require 8. Your arms might require a bit less, but that's very genetically driven. It takes a few years for you to learn that. So in the beginning, if you're making progress, fantastic. Try 2 sets more per week. Making progress, fantastic. Do that until you stop making progress. Okay, let's cut it back slightly, and that's where you stay.
Got it. And you don't have to be in the gym 2 hours in order to get an amazing workout.
No, unless you're a long-distance athlete, in which case you obviously would, but that's in terms of the sport. But when talking about resistance training, no. If you can get in, go hard, get out 45 minutes, perfect.
And I always like to share with our community something that may be new to them. Descending rep schemes. So I think most of us are familiar with ascending rep schemes. Would you be able to share a little bit about how the two differ, and if there's value in descending rep schemes and how they could be incorporated into a comprehensive training program?
Okay, so just want to make sure about the language. Ascending is going heavier, descending is going lighter. Okay.
Yeah.
I think for beginners, ascending is good just because it teaches them how to move, etc. If we're talking about optimal results, I prefer descending.
Mm-hmm.
The reason being is, when do you have the most amount of energy? In the beginning. When you have the most amount of clarity of mind and in body? In the beginning. When do you have the most amount of mental drive? In the beginning. When is the injury risk, technically speaking, the highest? When you're the most fatigued. So if you're going to place the heaviest load when your energy is low, at the end, when your fatigue is high, that's kind of a mismatch. Let's go heavy in the beginning. When you have a lot of energy, your fatigue is not as high. You get a good quality set in, but now you can put the weight back and say, wow, that was tough, but I can go a bit lighter now because I've already expelled a lot of energy. I can go a bit lighter now. And then you do that. And then you do perhaps another set, and if it calls for another set. And I think that's a lot safer. It's a lot better. Typically, your reps will increase as your load decreases. Not always, but typically. And I just think that's a far better approach in terms of overall results, fatigue management. But it does take some time to learn, just because a lot of people do ascending schemes.
Mm-hmm.
But to give you an example, I'll be in the gym and there's unfortunately a bunch of teenage boys, and they're like, yeah, let's go heavy. Let's go heavy for the next one. Let's go heavy. And I'm scratching my head. If you're going heavy, and I know you didn't go close to failure in the previous set, what use was the previous set? Like, what did it mean? Because you have to go close enough to proximity to failure in order for it to yield growth. And so they kind of hold back because they're thinking, oh, I still need to do something.
I need to go heavier.
Yeah. Yes. And I'd rather you give all the energy, sit, relax, heart rate comes down, the fatigue in that muscle decreases a bit, go hard, sit, heart rate, fatigue, go hard. And that's far better in my opinion.
Thank you for explaining that. So in a descending rep scheme, you would have a warm up, so a couple of sets of warm up so that you're not going into it cold.
Mhm.
Start with your heaviest weight and probably your lowest reps, and then go down in weight, but go up in reps. But you're
If
also
possible.
doing the most work when you're the strongest and the least
Yes.
fatigue.
Correct. That's perfectly said. And that warm up, let's say you're starting with 100 pounds. I would say 60 pounds for 8 reps, 80 pounds for 4 reps, 90 pounds for 1 rep. Start with the 100-pound set.
Wonderful. And is that something that you incorporate into your own training?
Yes, absolutely. I haven't done ascending sets in years, ever.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
So even for something like pull-ups, I would start without a machine, like the
uh-huh.
assistants, just bodyweight pull-ups, and I'll do like 2 or 3 sets, and then I'll move to the machine that helps me. So it's still going from heaviest
Yep.
to
To
lightest, but I might do 10 reps, 8 reps, 6 reps, because it's getting heavier. Well, it's the fatigue is getting more, but I can't lower the weight yet because
mhm.
it's still my body weight. And then I go to the machine and, oh, I can do 10 reps because the machine is helping me. So I do that to my own training. It's the way that I train most of my clients. 1 or 2 calls for something else, but typically I train that way.
And so tying that back into logbooking, what, in addition to my sets, my reps, my exercise, how are you, how do you coach in terms of helping understand what was my RPE? So if I'm starting, again, thinking about a descending rep scheme, um, how do you encourage people to logbook their rate of perceived exertion? How do you think about rest when you're thinking about a descending scheme? And then last question, um, how are you, do you also encourage people to log their recovery or how they're feeling between workouts?
So I'm going to answer the latter 2 questions. Rest as much as you need. It's different from each person. It's going to be based on your age, cardiovascular capacity. Typically, I would say 2 to 3 minutes. More is better when we look at the research, but don't set up camp. Number 3, I do advocate for people to track recovery. That's kind of a conversation that you have with your coach. But in a
Mhm.
book, I would make a note since like I was very tired, didn't have a lot of sleep, stress is high, small notes like that. I typically ask myself 5 questions: Did I sleep enough? Eat enough? Did I have too much stress? If I'm so inclined, am I taking the right supplements? Or is my volume too high? But I wouldn't ask that in the logbook. And then the first question, logbooking, descending rep schemes. RPE. First, I would need to teach what RPE is. And the best way of explaining it, if they're cardiovascularly okay to do it, hop on a spin bike, crawl off. That's RPE 10. There's no better way to explain it. You go until you crawl off. That's RPE 10. Now that we know what the max is, you start teaching that. For most people, I'm going to say for beginners, 6 and 7. The more experience you get, you can go for a 7 to 8. And I would just teach people how the rate of perceived exertion, how that translates. Some people find the RIR a bit easier to understand, so reps in
Reps in
reserve. So
reserve. Mhm.
if 10, or how many reps do you have left in the tank? So I would just teach them to start tracking that, and it's going to be trial and error, unfortunately.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thank you. And we have a question from the chat for you. I was hoping people would want to take advantage of your expertise. And we may have to interpret this question a little bit. So, what about when you do X amount slow with a hold and then X amount fast?
That's just a way of trying to make your training a bit different. It, at some point, people get bored of training. I understand that. I respect that. So you might
Never.
want to try different things. It's just going to be a different form of progressive overloading. My thing is just, are you getting better? Are you putting pen to paper and saying, I hold it for 5 seconds fast or whatever. Next week, can I do it with 12 pounds instead of 10 pounds? Yes, I could, but it hurt a lot. Good. Hurt versus uncomfortable, there's a conversation there. But did you improve? Yes or no? And if you're not improving, it might not be the best thing for you. And don't build an emotional relationship with an exercise. If something is not working, don't be afraid to scrap it. I was emotionally attached to deadlifts forever, hurt my back, kept doing them, stopped doing them for a couple of months. I was like, hey, my back looks better. Well, then it's obviously time to not do that movement anymore.
So I think two great points there. One, don't be tied to a single modality or a single approach to your training, because if it's not working, and this is where your logbooking can become very valuable, if you're not seeing the progress, then you need to figure out what you need to change.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about the speed of movement during your training, if you're, whether it's different times for concentric, eccentric hold, or again, understanding how that applies to your goals, and then assessing if that training modality is getting you closer to continuing to progressively overload over time.
There are some very interesting studies about that. For instance, when we look at eccentric loading, so that lowering phase is very slow. It can yield a lot of growth, but it hurts a ton. And the science isn't all conclusive. So you might put that in from time to time. In fact, I just put that in because I was like, I just did straight progressive overload now for a competition for 25 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try and do something different for like 8 weeks while I go through a health phase post-show. Obviously, when you extreme diet, you have to nurture yourself with your relationship with food. Just try something different, something fun, and then I'll get back into my quote-unquote normal training.
Wonderful. And Daniel, you've been coaching a long time. Are there, as we start to wrap up today, are there a couple of tips that you would want to share with our community related to what may be some pathway to success in terms of logbooking, but then also some of what you would advise in terms of some tips in order to help anyone who's out there looking to maximize hypertrophy continue to make the progress in the gym that they are looking for?
So the very first thing, understanding the difference between pain and uncomfortable. It's normal to feel uncomfortable. Pain is a negative thing. If something is painful, stop. It's uncomfortable. There's a perspective of sucking it up. We tell strength athletes in training, you listen to your body. In competition, you tell your body to shut up. Sorry for my language, but that's just how they communicate. Tips in general: rest. More is typically better. Most people want to rush through their training sessions. The same can be said for their warm-ups. Take it very, very easy. Focus on that. Form videos, extremely, extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to maximize hypertrophy, food. You're literally trying to grow something of you that doesn't exist. That requires a bunch of calories. And then really hone in on recovery. So sleep, really, really important if you can afford it. Soft tissue massages. I'm a big fan of warm baths, not cold baths. Cold baths do the opposite for hypertrophy. Warm baths, and then enjoy the process. If you're not enjoying your training to an extent, maybe not the best approach. And then lastly, just be better. Me and Tom will be talking about this at the retreat. Just be better a bit day by day.
And I love those tips. Enjoy the process is key, but also the 1% better, or whatever percentage is within your goal of achieving, but try and be better every day. And there is no perfection. I think that's another one that we tend to encounter quite a bit. Another good question that came up in the chat as we're winding down: would it be possible to show a template of how to logbook?
So I would, if I'm using an actual book, the way that I would do it is I would write the weight, times and in brackets what I did last week before I go for my training sessions. So I'll write my entire session, and there's a number in the brackets after the multiplication sign. So 100 times bracket 10 bracket, and then I write the number that I did this week. Sometimes I might go heavier, so I'll scratch it out and say 105 for 8. But I would use that bracket system because then I can see last week I did it for 10. I don't have to page back. Takes like 5 minutes to write your workout beforehand. It kind of becomes a ritual. You put your nice music on. You have a nice drink if you're having one, like a pre-workout if you are so, or a coffee, black coffee, really, really healthy. And then you're on your way.
And a lot of people use apps to do something similar. So if you're paper focused, a logbook is definitely something that you can, it's tactile, it's tangible, and people love it, but you can accomplish something similar with an app, something like that we use in the Vegan Superhero Academy, which is heavy. Both can accomplish, but you need to do what's right for you. There's not one answer for everyone.
I will say having the sweat marks in your book as you page through it is kind of like a badge of honor because your papers wrinkle. So you come there next time like, oh, I remember this session.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Yes.
Daniel, this has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to having you back on the podcast in a couple weeks, whenever your time permits. We also want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thanks for the great questions. We really appreciate it. And keep sending them. That is why we're here. We want to answer your questions, to give you the knowledge you need to be the healthy, fit vegan that will be a great example for what we want to achieve in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I hope you're able to join us next week. We have a special treat. Janet Fitch will be joining us to talk about heart math. And if you're not familiar with heart math, I encourage you to go out to the Heart Math website, and I'll be posting some links for you to explore over the weekend. But it is a fascinating topic, and I know you're going to enjoy spending time with Janet and learning more about this amazing tool. In the meantime, superheroes, be strong, continue to spread the mission, and we'll see you next week. Be well.
Thank you very much.